Euangelion, the Greek word gospel, is taken from the good news that a runner would bring as a messenger coming to announce in the capital that victory had been achieved on the battlefield. And everyone would cheer. It would transform the lives of everybody in the city to know that they hadn't lost the war, they had won the war. But of course, they weren't the ones out there in the trenches. In the same way, Jesus says, I have accomplished salvation, not come help me save the world, but I have accomplished this. The law basically is do. The gospel basically is done. The gospel isn't what would Jesus do, now go and do that. The gospel is what has Jesus done, now believe that. This distinction between the law and the gospel really is the most important thing to remember, and it's one of the things that we're forgetting.
That pattern of God always making sure that we know that relationship comes before obedience, that we do not have a relationship with Him because we obey because He has made a relationship with us. That is made clear over and over again in the Bible. God says before He ever tells His people what the commands are, I'm the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, now obey me. Now, it's critical we understand He didn't say, you obey me and I'll let you out of Egypt. No, He said, I have redeemed you. Now here's the safe path for you to walk on. It's the order not just of the Old Testament passages. I mean, all the epistles of the New Testament basically follow that same order. In general, the first half of the epistles of Paul, of John, of Peter kind of say, here's what God has done in Christ. Here's how He has saved you. The last half of the epistles, now here's what you should do in response.
The moral commands that we should obey are like the railroad tracks for the train, that as the train's going, this is the way that the train's supposed to go. But the gospel is the engine and the fuel that makes the train actually move. And so it does a Christian no good and it does a non-Christian no good to just continue telling them, hey, here's the tracks, now go. But if they have no fuel, if they have no engine, they're just going to be a train stuck. And there's a lot of Christians, I think, today that are just trains sitting on tracks being told, go forward, but they're not being given an engine or any fuel to move them forward.
There are some pastors out there that assume, I think incorrectly, but understandably, that everyone in their church understands the gospel.
I remember years ago, I was asked to address a group, a large group, but they told me that they were mainly Christians. And they said, well, what are you going to preach on? And I said, well, I thought about preaching on the gospel. And they said, but we just told you that most of these people, we know them as very devout and sincere Christians. And I said, well, first of all, I appreciate that, but I can never assume that everyone there is truly Christian or has come to a biblical understanding of the gospel. That's number one. Number two, the gospel is not just for lost people. The gospel is for Christians.